Okay. Live. Here we are. 100 days into the election, or after the Trump 2.0 presidency, a couple days
Yeah.
after the election. We said we're going to keep this chat positive, Freudian slip, and focus on solutions and be forward looking. But definitely interesting times that we're living in. Hey, Joel.
Yeah, the 100 days feels like it's been 300.
Mm-hmm.
It's been emotionally and taxing for me, which is not normal. I'm usually able to keep myself fairly unattached, and kind of just stay grounded, and because I pride myself, and I think everybody should in my role, in understanding the moment and then trying to strategize and approach and make a structured plan to move forward and take advantage, because there's no benefit in complaining. And I think you and I can both agree with that. And if new information has presented, you then recalibrate, you utilize your view of the world, and then strategize moving forward. And in the last 2 or 3 weeks, for me, as a proud Canadian and Albertan, you I think a lot of Albertans can probably say this. You come to an emotional, you've gone through an emotional roller coaster that has caused you perhaps to not be grounded and centered and approaching your job and or life in the same way that you usually would. And that is where I found myself singularly yesterday and the day prior. It was, but I mean, I feel a lot better today. I've been doing a ton of reading and trying to better understand the person who won the election in Canada, and the party that he now runs. We know that party well, but I've done my best to better understand him, and that way we can approach from my perspective and build an investment outlook that can help people and my clients understand what is likely to stay the same and what is likely to change. Mm-hmm. So from Canada's position and integration into a very volatile America, it brings in a whole bunch of other things. So it's been 100 days since we talked last. In that time, it would be difficult not to say that things have drastically changed. Mm-hmm. Our relationship with the United States, while it might have felt taxing prior, it's likely only gotten worse. The only thing that has likely extended beyond that is the fact that America has decided to treat everybody else the same. And I think I went back and listened to it. We talked about the fact that Canada would benefit from America taking on the rest of the world at the same time. Mm-hmm. And that has been the case. So the first 100 days of the Trump administration has been a roller coaster, yes. From an all-time high middle of February, the NASDAQ was down over 20% at one point from that point. That is a very sharp decline. The same thing can be said for the S&P 500, which was at one point down 13-14% on the year, probably darn near close to 16-17% from all-time highs. That is, again, a very sharp decline in a short period of time. And I think a lot of people listening to this and those that pay attention to you and I understand why. The tariff or tax on the American people being imposed in order to negotiate or to take advantage of America's position in the global economy is very hard to stomach as an American consumer if you're doing it to everybody all at the same time. And if America were to flex its muscles on its two closest allies and neighbors without doing this to the rest of the world, I think Canada would be in a really tough position to negotiate. However, and what I would consider to be an error of strategy from the Trump administration's point of view, they've decided to kind of shoot everybody and then negotiate. And what that's allowed for is for Canada to sort of pick its allies or pretend to be closer allies with China and Europe. I don't believe that on a next 4-year period, that will be a pretending narrative. It will be more of a reality, given the history of our new prime minister.
Yeah.
He has very deep ties to Europe, and from a business perspective, has succeeded and done very well operating and understanding the Chinese economy. So that to me points in a direction where they will continue to focus there, and this will probably embolden them to be more aggressive with America. And in America, that is likely going to, and I think that this is not necessarily being signaled from the Trump administration, an America that is very clearly stepping away from the rest of the world from a global trade perspective, understanding that they are the global consumer, believing that they don't need the rest of the world. And whether to what degree that is true is not really the point. It's that this is their ongoing narrative. They believe that they are the army or the navy that secures all trade and waterways. They are the funder of security and global trade, and they believe that they have gotten a raw deal. Without litigating the truth of that, they are now coming to the conclusion that from a national security perspective, they believe taking care of a population of people that has fallen behind is paramount. They believe that pulling their supply chain out of what would be considered to be enemies and or people that they don't align morally with, and into countries that they do. I'm a big believer that, and I think markets are sniffing this out too, that America is nearshoring. Mexico is up 21% this year. The S&P is down. Canada's kind of flat. If you look at Germany, up 25% this year. A lot of China up 10 or 11%. If you start to consider what has worked and what hasn't as a result of this global trade policy change from the United States, you start to gain an understanding of where the puck is going. So you then try to integrate that into what has happened in Canada. And I do believe that Scott Bessent's presser that he did last week was a really good indicator of what America wants to accomplish. And he said that it's not America first necessarily, so much as it is people that work with America or their allies. He wants to solidify that in a fashion that is mutually beneficial and a zero tariff trade situation. So I think over the next 3 months, the focus of this administration is you got June, where you have a 6.5, don't quote me on the exact amount, but 6.5-ish trillion in treasuries that are rolling over and need to be refinanced. That 10-year yield needs to be negotiated down. He's going to want the Fed to cut interest rates so that they are financing debt in the high threes rather than the high fours. Currently, we're sitting at about a 4.2% as of today in this recording from a 10-year yield perspective. If they can get that down another 40 points, you're looking at hundreds of billions of dollars in savings from a deficit perspective. That combined with what I think is the real Trump long-term, well, I should say midterm goal, which is to have a Mar-a-Lago Accord of sorts, which is to bring all of the allies in to his beautiful house in Florida so he can be remembered for striking the world's greatest deal, just like what happened for in 1945 and 1985 with what's the word I'm looking for the what is the
talking
name
about
of
Bretton
that?
Woods?
Bretton Woods, thank you.
Yeah.
that to me is where the puck's going. How markets, stock prices react and or behave during this period of time is going to be very volatile. We got a VIX spike today. At one point in this 100 days, we had the VIX well into the 50s, which, for those who don't know what the VIX is, it's the volatility index, which is measuring the, most people refer to it as the fear gauge. If you consider past history, the times in which we've seen that in the it was 2008, 2020, periods in which there's an immense amount of uncertainty. So currently we have a delay, 90 days on reciprocal tariffs from the United States. Canada is largely protected because of the USMCA or whatever. How they end up moving forward, it really seems like a 10% tariff across the globe is the angle that the United States is taking. This is going to be very challenging for Canada to navigate. But I do believe I think a big decision that Mark Carney is going to be making, and what I think Canadians didn't realize they were voting for, was that you are now putting a person in place that is likely going to be asked to choose between one of our largest buyers of agriculture products, China, and one of our very deep trade partners in Europe, or a relationship with the United States and Mexico. And I'm not so certain it needs to be 100% one direction or the other, but it's going to be very interesting to see where our Liberal government and our Prime Minister finds themselves from an alliance perspective between the two. So
it's so fascinating too, because I think like we always are talking about the convergence of politics and markets, and it's like I'm always saying political risk is business risk. In Canada, we have had definitely, I mean, what's happened, for those who don't know, in terms of the political futures of Canada is really remarkable. Like when we spoke last in January, there was basically a assumption that it was going to for sure be a conservative government, that Pierre Poilievre would be the prime minister with a sizable majority government, that Canada would, from a federal perspective, for the first time since 2015, return to a focus on growth, pro-growth policies, growing Canada's domestic economy, Canada's exports, decreasing the size of government a little bit. And that's not the case today. And, you know, one of the things that I think is so fascinating too, and we can get into talking about this, is just like the way in which the politics of what Trump's been doing have changed based on what he sees in the market. Like we know he watches the markets, and we know that many times when you're trying to right size and create these long-term policies, the short-term signals are sometimes not great, even if they're going to be good in the long term. I mean, I'm not saying they're going to be with Trump's policies, but it's just been really interesting to see that dynamic between politics and markets. And so when we, on Monday, just to recap, the Liberals were able to secure a pretty strong minority government. They have 169 of the 343 seats in the House of Commons. They are against the Conservatives with 144, who had considerable gains in terms of their political performance. And the NDP were decimated down to 7 seats. What I find interesting is the policies that the Liberals are putting forward, or under Carney, there's a couple of things. Carney is definitely a change from Trudeau, and I think that we can expect his economic agenda and the way that he governs to be different than Trudeau, though the same in some areas. But we are going to see, I think, under Mark Carney as Prime Minister over the next 4 years, a Canada that is focused on government stimulated growth. And I think part of where I see challenges for that from a market perspective and also a political perspective is, I mean, there's a couple of things. First of all, we actually don't have a current federal budget to base any of these assumptions on. The last time we got a formal budget was last April, budget 2024. The last sort of fiscal document that we have is from December, our fall economic update. And because we went into an election in late March, we don't have a budget. So that's actually going to be one of the first priorities of the Carney government, is actually getting a budget in place so that Canada has supply to operate. Because in a parliamentary democracy, you don't just get to decide that you're going to spend XYZ. You actually have to get that approval from Parliament. And Carney will not have, likely not have an issue getting that support, even though he has a minority government, because the NDP are likely to support him. Anyway, I'm jumping around here a little bit. When the struggle and the challenge I think I see with what we anticipate Carney's approach to governing is going to be is that government stimulated growth. And I don't know that under the current circumstance, with what we're facing with tariffs, global uncertainty, and the fiscal position Canada is in currently, that we actually can do that. Let me just point to a few different policies, and then we can get into some solutions. The deficit that was projected in the last economic statement is 48.3 billion. The total debt that Canada is carrying right now is 1.35 trillion. If you add provinces in there, it's well over provincial debt. It's well over 2.2 trillion. We have seen some of the highest growths in the public sector is in terms of a percentage of our economy. It's now a little bit over 20%. We are now paying more in debt servicing costs at 54.1 billion than we are spending on Canada Health Transfer, childcare benefits, national defense. We're spending almost double on debt servicing than we are on national defense during a time where we may not be able to rely on our neighbors south of the border in terms of the Arctic theater and what's happening with Russia. We are projecting lower economic growth due to tariff uncertainty. We have had massive growth in our population, which brings our per capita GDP down a little bit because our productivity has not been keeping pace at the same level. And we see Carney commit to policies in terms of reversing the capital gains inclusion rate, which I think is overall a good thing, and reversing the consumer carbon tax, which was revenue neutral. But part of their deficit assumptions from the last fiscal update is bringing in about $4 to $5 billion per year from those changes in the capital gains inclusion rate. Not to mention all of the spending that has been committed to help stimulate the economy. Carney has, I think, the last thing I'll say is Carney, I think his goal is through a sort of Keynesian approach to stimulating the economy through massive spends in infrastructure spending. We have a housing problem in Canada. Let's get the government involved in building more houses. We have a defense problem in Canada. Let's spend more money on organizations to sort of stimulate defense. We have so you get what I'm saying. Like, again, only time will tell if those policies work. And I think that there is definitely a role for the federal government to play when we are sort of on the brink of possible. I'll let you just speak to whether we're on the brink of a recession, but Canada is not in a solid fiscal position. And that's why I think that sometimes it becomes difficult to implement some policies that Carney is hoping to implement in the context of, well, we don't necessarily have the strength to do that at this point, arguably. And again, I don't know, what do you think markets are going to say about, I just saw Fitch is possibly going to downgrade Canada's AAA credit rating based on Carney's plan. They announced that yesterday. What are all these things? What does the market need to see from public spending and from the economy to not be in a bad spot or potentially a recession?
What a terrific question. And this is very difficult to spin positively, given Carney has inherited inarguably a bad or a struggling economy, a challenging budget, a deficit that is sizable, and a pretty challenging geopolitical situation. So he has his work cut out for him. I would say that if I was sitting in his chair, I'd be very concerned. With that said, I can sit here and give advice on what I believe would reignite the economy or the Canadian economy, but there's no value in that from an investment perspective, because I don't believe they would take that. I think you said something very interesting, and maybe this is because I reread his book, but the John Maynard Keynes or a Keynesian approach would be a refreshing view from my perspective. So Canada currently is, from an economic perspective, darn near in a recession. Depends how you want to approach
it. Yeah, what are the metrics are you using?
Like we're looking over like GDP growth quarter over quarter, and by definition, generally speaking, if you have two negative growth quarters in a row, definitionally you are in a recession. We are not technically there, but it's pretty stagnant. And if it wasn't for the large government deficits that are being run, would we be in one? Probably. If you were to go Canada x
because
Alberta,
those deficits are infusing cash into the economy to propel GDP growth through employment, through giving people stimulus spending.
We're stimulating, and this is where long run history. We didn't have in the United States they refer to the Fed put, and in Canada it's the Bank of Canada put. But basically, we didn't understand the monetary tools and fiscal tools to the point in which we do today, where our recessions aren't as deep as they once were, because we have a good understanding and a lot of data that is being fed to us to manipulate and to improve and soften economic hardship. And that is done via government spending generally, and a reduction in interest rates. So we have a very good feel for where the market's going. The unfortunate reality of Canada is that we are an export nation. We're not a consumption-led nation like the United States, and service-based nation like the United States, where we have the ability to not be as affected by commodity prices. Canada is very dependent on energy and agriculture commodities and the pricing that they get for those goods. We export those out of the country, which brings in revenue. We don't have a lot of people coming here to invest dollars. We tend to bring in other money from other economies via our exports. Unlike the United States, which sure has those features, it isn't as reliant. We also have a very heavy reliance on the, let's call it, appreciation of real estate, the turnover of real estate. It's a very large percentage of the economy. If you think about the real economy, housing and real estate in general is a massive portion. Turnover, real estate agents selling homes, people buying homes, lawyer fees on those homes being transacted on, development. And these things are all a massive portion of the Canadian economy, and a big portion of people investing money outside of the country into ours. That is where the lion's share is focused. Where our economy struggles is innovation, productivity. This is a very concerning metric at the moment, and it needs to be focused on in order for us to somehow pull ourselves out of this sideways economic move. We are increasingly becoming more and more European in terms of how our economy acts, how our people morally participate. And that is a recipe for a stock market that doesn't go up, a stock market that lags the economies that have a different mindset. So I choose to be optimistic, likely because I'm biased in where I live and was born. I'm Canadian, just like you. I want to believe that we can kind of shake our I don't know, our bias to, or I should say, our focus on government programs, our lack of investment dollars, our unwillingness to be entrepreneurial. And this is more broadly, not necessarily on an individual level. I just feel that has been the stasis of the last 10 years. And I'm hopeful that a very, it's inarguable to say that Mark Carney has a very, very impressive resume as a person.
Yeah. I've been saying this too. Like, I think that it would be unfair to paint Carney and Trudeau with the same brush, because we actually haven't seen, he doesn't have a track record in government. We can make assumptions based on his book. We can make assumptions based on what he did at the Bank of Canada, some of the things that he said, but he hasn't actually had the opportunity to act on some of these things. And so I would personally like to give him the opportunity. Certainly a very talented and experienced person who definitely is a grown-up when it comes to some of these things in terms of like geopolitics and just sort of understanding that the guy is definitely skilled. Here's where my sort of concern and caution comes from. So more than 50, let me just get this exact number. More than 50% of the country voted for a political party that is progressive. So whether that's through the Liberal, the NDP, or the Green Party. And so we have part of the struggle that we see with Canada's economy is our ability to participate, like individuals' ability to actually participate in it. I mean, there's like that same, somebody was saying, and I don't know if it's from somebody famous, but it's no wonder young people don't like capitalism. They actually haven't had the opportunity to participate in it yet. So you said it. Yeah, exactly. Peter Thiel. So when you get into kind of looking at incentive structures in politics, just like we do in markets, here's what I see as something to just sort of be aware of. And I think a lot of the people that are watching right now and are interested in these topics probably understand these concepts, but I think we need to start communicating with people who like don't typically see themselves as needing to consider some of these things because they don't feel like they're currently affected by them. We need to get people to sort of understand some of these concepts a bit more. I want to talk a little bit about the stock market growth. So you talked about the fact that if we continue to sort of be more like Europeans in terms of our spending and how we operate things, we don't have the same opportunity for stock market growth. How, like, when it comes to, you see a lot of boomers that, and sorry, boomers, but I'm gonna call you out a little bit here. You see a lot of boomers that have this, what I consider to be a luxury, to be able to fixate on Trump and protest vote. Exactly. Those people own their homes. Many of them probably were able to participate in defined benefit pension plans. They have seen extraordinary stock market growth over the past 20 and 30 years if they were invested in the market, and especially since COVID. They are now focused, like there's polling, they're now focused mostly on the Trump factor and access to healthcare. I don't even know how to ask this without being negative. I don't want to be negative, but realistically speaking, what can a Canadian prime minister do to protect against what Trump is doing economically? Like, what is actually within their control? Because I think we have all fallen into this trap of thinking, like, if we have somebody who looks more like a prime minister and sort of has that background, that somehow Carney or a Liberal or somebody has more ability to push back against Trump than conservative policies. But like, is there even one Canadian company listed on the S&P 500? Like, is there anything that we can do to counter what Trump is doing in terms of stock market? Because I want to acknowledge the fact that people have concerns about those things, but I think sometimes we don't fully recognize the relationship between these things, and we make assumptions. Like, we can't ask Carney to do things that he can't do and then get mad at him if he's not successful in it. Like, I think we have to be reasonable with what we can expect from a prime minister. Do you have anything to say about that?
I do. I have a million things to say. Where I want to start is where I'm struggling. I want to clarify a few things. And I know you know this, but the federal government's impact on healthcare is minimal, right? So people focusing on that from a federal level should be focusing more on the messaging more so than the funding and support. The same goes for housing to a pretty significant level. I think Canada's housing problem is largely a result of municipal regulation and provincial. But I would also point to the real big massive reason for it. So that to me covers off those two specifics. But if we really want to talk about the stock market, which in my line of work is the measure of your contribution and the calculus of the productivity of the population of your country. Because the one thing that separates the United States from the rest of the world is, in my estimation, two specific things, which is if you were to go and ask 100 people on the street what they viewed as being a honorable job, a lot of people would say business owner and entrepreneur. I'd venture to guess that 7 or 8 out of 10 of people would say that is a career that they want to pursue. If you were to go and ask 100 Canadians that question, I'd venture to guess that it's closer to 1 or 2 people that would say that. And what that has resulted in America is a risk-taking mentality. It has developed the most unbelievably liquid and deep secondary private markets that exists in the history of time. They have the ability, if you're an entrepreneur, you have the ability to go to a private market rather than a big 6 Canadian bank or a massive institution like CPP or whatever, or Canadian grants. Instead of going that direction, you're able to go to investors that have had an exit from Facebook or Amazon or whatever business. They have become independently wealthy because of it. And then they have passed on, because those folks are generally not satisfied. They have passed on this belief onto the next generation by investing in their ideas. And this has a very incredible positive sum flywheel effect that enables a continuation of innovation and stock market appreciation. That moral and, I think, societal belief is an incredible asset. They also have the benefit of the rule of law, which Canada also has. You combine that with a demographic situation in the United States where they have a lot of young people. They have this incredible desire to create and build. And it's no wonder that the United States has vastly outperformed the rest of the world from a productivity perspective and a GDP output, and they've created an enormous amount of wealth. Obviously, there's some like wealth gap problems, and they have their own issues. Do not get me wrong.
No, of course.
Canada has and could, and you know what? When I was growing up and having graduated from high school and entered like the working society, trying to help build for yourself, we used to have this belief of you could be an entrepreneur and create for yourself. And I think what has happened in Canada is that's decayed, which is ironic
because it is actually never been easier to do so. Like, from the advent of technology, AI, like, it is so, that's, I think, what drives me insane is it's like starting a business today versus 10 years ago, like even from the perspective of incorporating, like, you know, like shout out to Good Lawyer, there's like all these different like you don't have to go spend $20,000 on a lawyer or, you know, pay somebody thousands of dollars to create your website or, you know, get a graphic designer. Like there is literally never been lower barrier to entry for people to try their ideas out and do them, but we don't. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you and go on a tangent here because like one of the things that you just said, and here is my frustration with how we've done this. And I know we're supposed to be positive, but I need to get this out. We have basically set up incentive structures in this country where like we are very separated from the consequences of our actions, good or bad. If we do something really well, we can be separated from the incredible upside of it. And if we fail, we're very protected from the downside, which I think to a certain extent, when it comes to healthcare, for example, and education, like we should not be having like children hungry at school or people who like are going bankrupt because they need heart surgery. Like I do think that is fundamental to Canada. But to your point in terms of the culture, we have created a bigger size of government, and then we have made more people sort of safe and insulated from the consequences of their actions through having a larger state, which again, I'm not saying is wrong across the board. I want to be clear about this. And then we have created, I think, a state dependency in this country that quashes, like you say, the entrepreneurial spirit, makes it difficult for people to sort of realize the consequences of their actions in a way that, you know, failure propels to another, hopefully not failure, and our success propels you to help other people as well. And I think that what I'm hoping to see from the Liberal government is a remaking of incentive structures, because they have this minority right now at 169 seats. They can operate sort of largely as a majority, but we have to create those incentives with government policy of allowing people to thrive and or fail in the business sense in the way that the United States does. And part of my wonder is whether we are even a country like that. The Hub was doing a live stream for the election, and a writer was on there talking about the fact that at the end of the day, the United States is a fundamentally small C conservative country, small government, take care of my sort of family and my community first. Canada is not that way. And so I think that we are going to have some challenges in terms of navigating that. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant, but I see, and then coupled on top of that with the just misinformation and disinformation about what conservative parties in Canada actually stand for and what they actually want to prioritize. Like I think that in many ways we talk about conservatism as being like selfish, but I see a country of a lot of people who are acting in self-interest, and because those self-interests are so intertwined with the self-interest of the government and the state, you get a situation where it's not feasible for people to want to vote differently, I guess. Sorry, that was like a huge rant, but I just needed to get that out.
And you know what's interesting? I really enjoy listening to people like Derek Thompson and Ezra Klein, who are Democrats on the left side in the United States. And recently they both co-authored a book called Abundance.
Yes.
Which I think everybody should pick up and read. There's a lot of, they've been talking about their book quite a bit. They've done their own podcast tour, and they have a really great explainer on and Hook on YouTube that's about 45 minutes long that I recommend everybody go and watch. Basically outlining this idea of positive sum mentality, regulation that gets out of the way rather than constantly slowing things down. And I think that this should speak directly to Canadians, because I was as I was explaining the differences between America and the rest of the world and why they've been able to create this incredible amount of abundance. And while certainly it's left behind many people, and I believe Canada used to be the perfect, I used to go and travel and say that we used to be the perfect mix between Europe and the United States.
Yeah.
That we used to have to incentivize entrepreneurs while taking care of the people that lived here. I have long been a big believer in immigration, smart immigration. I really think that we are positioned in it for an incredible run from an economic perspective if we just get out of the way. And my concern, and I suppose message, that if you want the TSX and if you are using it as a measure, as Donald Trump largely did in his first term, talking about 401ks, if Carney, and nothing about his book Values tells me that he cares about economic and growth necessarily, and more so wants to align it with no, it's like a human value tie
Sorry for interrupting,
to capitalism, right? Which sounds so good. I mean, everything unfortunately sounds good, but like as I read through the Liberal platform, there's so many platitudes and like nice words in there that has almost no context and or like, we're going to build this. I don't know how. I would really, if I go through a lot of it, it's just so vague, and it makes it very challenging for me to directionally focus. So this is a long-winded way of me coming to a point where I think and do believe, because of the vast riches that we sit on from a commodity perspective, if you look from a geopolitical point of view, the demand that is going to skyrocket, already is skyrocketing in the United States for energy, for electricity, for rare earths. This has become a very hot topic. If you think about all the things that go into what the future of the global economy is, which is artificial intelligence, large language models, mass sums of data being analyzed and then utilized to make software more efficient, to make what I would consider to be like supply chains less human dependent, to making lives better, to contributing to faster economic growth, which then results in better standards of living. We have the ability to supercharge the largest economy on the planet if we so choose to, if we are willing to get out of our way. And the one thing that I'm motivated by in the whole liberal win is that I believe the man who won is likely going to be very focused on this infrastructure. He's made it quite clear that he wants to bring the provinces together.
Yeah.
The one, and I think as an Albertan, and after recently seeing what happened with Danielle Smith, I don't see either person extending an olive branch at the moment. And perhaps this most recent, what do you call it? She changed some sort of legislation.
There was, amendments to our recall legislation introduced yesterday in the legislature.
Yeah, okay. So this doesn't seem to me, it's more like a shot across the bow, being like, I will use this. I'm hopeful. And I think a successful Canada is not possible without Alberta.
Mm-hmm.
If we do not see some form of concession on both sides.
Yep. Compromise. Yeah.
Whether it be a rewriting of current legislation or some form of energy corridor, or effectively a reduction in regulation on our largest provincial economy per capita, and one with the most growth potential, and the one that's accepting the largest percentage as a percentage of the people there. Immigration, the one that's taking care of the country as it struggles. I really, really find it difficult over the next 3 years to view the TSX as a great opportunity if that isn't a result. So after Carney got in, the TSX did nothing. It was flat. Nobody was excited.
Yeah, I saw that.
I read every single banknote on the win. It was, and that is a signal. I have no idea if Carney's reading into that, but the guy's the most connected prime minister we've probably had ever, or at least in my adult life, from his connections to finance globally. So I would say I would be, if I was the person who won, and the first thing I would look at is effectively how did bonds trade, and how did the stock market do? And I'd be reading every banknote to hear what economists have to say about me and my policies. If he's willing to read that and try to extend those olive branches to the rest of the country, while I believe and I hope he makes some concessions and feeds Donald Trump's ego. I mean, he's a simple man down there. Like, it's all about him.
All men are, Joel. No, I'm joking.
no argument here. In my opinion, Chrystia Freeland won the last trade agreement. She did a fantastic job. I have no idea if she's going to get that role. You would have a much better idea than I would in negotiating whatever new trade agreement needs to be built. But I'm optimistic about our relationship with the United States. I really believe, and I think that the biggest signal is Mexico here. They want to nearshore manufacturing. North America has the perfect setup where Canada has unlimited not literally, but pretty much minerals and energy. We have the ability to also engineer and manufacture those and export those to a country in Mexico that is got a terrific demographic. Labor costs are very competitive globally, and the greatest consumer to ever live, is right in the middle. Yeah. Truthfully, North America can be a economic superpower. And when Mark Carney, to me, and rightly so, identifies that Canada can be, I'm really hopeful he's not like, well, no, that's because I want to trade with Europe. I really hope that while I understand people's animosity towards the United States right now, I respect it, and I think that they have mistreated us, they have disrespected us, and we should be pissed off. However, do not let that blind you to the opportunity.
And I hope that during, like, to your point, I hope that, a lot of the reason why people voted Liberal in this election, there were many reasons, but fear of the United States and wanting somebody to stand up to sort of Donald Trump. Carney has said that he believes the old relationship with the United States is over. I don't know if he was just saying that to sort of understand that the ballot question this time was Trump. I hope that sometimes strength doesn't always look like strength, right? Like, sometimes strength looks like compromise, looks like letting the other person win in a small way so that you can win in a bigger way for the long term. And I hope that what Carney does in the coming days and weeks and months in the beginning of his term as prime minister for the next 4 years, or his tenure as prime minister rather, does the hard stuff first. Like, I hope that while he has the political ability to do so, I hope that he spends the next 6 to 12 months making structural reforms and adjustments and positioning Canada for the long term. And I hope that he does so knowing that, there are people, like, if he wants to make some more center-right adjustments to make our economy stronger, he's going to have support in the Conservative. Pierre Poilievre Pierre Poilievre doesn't have a seat currently. That's a whole other story. But the Conservatives are not going to vote against energy corridors. They are not going to vote against efforts to right-size productivity in this country, to make sure that critical minerals can, like a mine doesn't take 20 years to be approved. I hope that he uses this time to put in place things that people, even in his own party, may not like because of how much it's moved to the left. And I hope he has the leadership. I hope he has the leadership strength to not care about being liked right off the bat, but care about being effective. And, he moved the party a little bit more to the center. Many of the policies that were included were actually conservative policies in his platform. And I hope he resists the temptation to govern based on vibes. Like, I truly hope that he governs in prose rather than in poetry, and uses all that experience that he has to genuinely make the country better, because we have several external threats from an economic and security perspective, from the Atlantic theater in the north, from the uncertainty of Russia, to what's happening in the United States, to what's happening internally in terms of discontent. And I genuinely hope, like, I lean more right of center politically, but I will happily clap and congratulate and encourage any prime minister that is focused on those structural reforms. And I think that what we need to do is we need to ask the electorate, to understand that if we really care about Canada, and we really care about our country, and we really care about unity, that not everybody can get what they want all the time. And how something feels and what something is are two different things. And we have to, if you're going to ask people who have been extremely successful to sacrifice a little bit, we all have to sacrifice a little bit in terms of what that means. So that might not mean that we're going to be on the front page of Vibes Inc. and be cool, but we can be effective. And I hope that I hope that Carney has the strength to do that and moves his caucus in that way, because that will be good for all of Canada, and that will be good for our relationship among the provinces. It will be good for each of us as individuals, because there'll be higher paying jobs, there'll be more opportunity, there'll be more capital for investment. And so I think that there is hope for that. And to your point, in terms of what the stock market is looking for, and what people are looking for in terms of the strength of the Canadian economy, we don't have to wait for government on this. Say Carney goes a completely different direction and doesn't go as far as he could on pro-growth policies. We as individuals can choose to do our small part to be entrepreneurial, to be productive, even if you are in a government job. Productivity doesn't have to be mandated by somebody. Productivity can be something that you choose to do for yourself. If you're in a $50,000 a year government paying job that's pretty monotonous, you yourself can find ways to be productive and make contributions in that way. You don't have to be some huge entrepreneur making millions of dollars a year to feel like that can be upon you. And I think that is the culture shift and the hope, I think, is that it is actually all within all of us to do a small part to move our country in that direction.
And you know what's funny? Your 5 minutes there where you spoke to me was the message missed by the CPC in their most recent, I'll call it 3 months of failure, where they weren't, well, not that it was necessarily fair. There's a lot of people that came out and voted. They had they grew their seat number. Yeah. But they didn't win. They didn't win the majority. They didn't win, and they aren't they are not the governing body. Their failure to me was to send that message of hope and growth. To me, as much as there was words in there that spoke to that, to me, it wasn't the calling to the people that we can grow, that we can do great things, and that we will do great things. So it doesn't take long to shift opinion. If we can see one thing in the United States, I've never seen some of the most successful investors to ever walk the earth in December were saying this is the most pro-business government we've ever seen. Vibes were high. America was going to become the greatest that ever was great. And you now ask that exact same man, Stan Druckenmiller, whether or not he believes this is the most pro-business administration he's ever seen, and I guarantee you, he says it's the opposite of that.
Mm-hmm.
We can do the exact same thing in Canada. This does not take 4 years. It doesn't take 12 months. It takes 60 days.
Yep.
You can send a message and quickly to the business community. You can tell young people that they have hope if you just send the message that they want to hear. And I believe that that's possible. I still do. We have all the tools. We have one of the highest educated populations on the planet. We have incredible and immense resources. We are resourceful if we want. We have the largest consumer, an insatiable consumer. We have one that is currently signaling that there's going to be 30% growth in energy demand south of our border. We haven't seen this sort of industrial innovation and growth opportunity since the 1940s. This is a paradigm shift. Young people, while are incredibly terrified, feel like they're disenfranchised, don't have any upward mobility. There's more snakes than ladders. All of this is true. But if we get out of our own way or and change our mindset and view, okay, holy mackerel, I can now start a $2-3 billion company with 2 employees now because I have the ability to utilize new tools that never existed before. The fact that you can or master new things that make you more efficient than 5 of you could have been just 5 years ago, and not view that as being like, holy man, I can deliver so much value with these tools. How do I integrate myself? If people can think that way and then see the true opportunities and ignore the noise that is obviously not to be diminished, but to be considered, but then pivoted upon. If you can do that and be like, okay, yeah, sure, I don't got a house right now, but like, I know for a fact that the United States has an incredible growing demand for electricity. They have no way of delivering it. They have no way of producing it. Holy mackerel, how is that not an incredible opportunity for my province and for myself, who is right in the middle of it? You then just go up the value chain of that reality, and you have an immense amount of opportunity. So with great uncertainty and with massive amounts of change comes incredible opportunities.
Yes. So first 100 days, to wrap it up here, uncertain, ups, downs, new government in Canada, uncertainty as well. But I think, progress does, as you say, always move forward, even maybe if not in a straight line. And we have to just keep our eye on the prize on that. And I think the key takeaway here is understand your agency and what you can control, whether it comes to tariffs, whether it comes to federal government policy, and move in the direction of pro-growth and positivity, regardless of what any government is saying to you. So
100%. I'm interested to see the progress that comes out of Ottawa. I'm basically just, I feel like I need to have a reminder set up or some sort of notification set up for when they start to talk, because it's going to be interesting, and you'll be able to gauge the economy sentiment just by looking at how Canadian bonds and the stock market reacts. So I'll be waiting. Mel, I really appreciated your little 30 minutes yesterday.
Oh, thanks. I sometimes it feels like, oh my goodness, what's going on? But sometimes you just got to let it out. But
I know.
Where can people find you if they want to work with you or follow you along?
You know what? Interestingly, I've been posting more on LinkedIn than anywhere else. You'll find me there, Joel Shackleton. Additionally, I got a podcast that I'm doing bi-weekly, Reformed Millennials, and on Twitter. I don't post a lot. I'm more of somebody who retweets, but those are the 3 locations. And if you really like ridiculous market memes, check me out on Instagram, or my podcast on Instagram, and Reformed Millennials. Mel, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Joel. Godspeed.
Yeah, let's
Take
do it
care.
again soon.
Bye.